Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find Kyndryl and the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com. Negotiations are incredibly stressful and can bring out the worst in people. Wouldn't it be better if there were a principled way to negotiate? Wouldn't it be better if there were a way to treat people fairly and get treated fairly in a negotiation? Today's book offers a new negotiation strategy that does both these things, a field-tested method that reframes how negotiations play out. Our guest helps identify what is really at stake in a negotiation, what he calls the pie. We will share how it helped reframe a high-stakes negotiation when Coca-Cola purchased Honest Tea, a company our guest co-founded with a former student. We will also introduce the pie framework and how it works for everyday negotiations. It is an honor to welcome serial entrepreneur, serial author, and professor at Yale University, author of Split the Pie, A Radical New Way to Negotiate, Barry Nalebuff. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you, man, on the show. And I thought before we lose people, as you see across your statistics on a YouTube channel, I thought we'd get the big idea of the book out first and then dive into a little bit about how to use the framework and what it is. But maybe we'll start with the big idea.
As you said, I teach at Yale. My students at Yale are smart, they're empathetic, they're great problem solvers until they start negotiating. And then some malady takes over and they think they have to act like a jerk in order to succeed. And what I want to do is share a principled approach to negotiation that shows how to succeed without being a jerk. And so that's probably what I should have called the book, Negotiating Without Being a Jerk. And the trick is, if you bring your whole self, your empathy, your problem-solving skills, people are afraid of being taken advantage of because the other side might be a jerk. Or they might actually just be like you, but don't know a better way to negotiate. And so how do you bring your whole self, the tools that have allowed you to be successful in everything else you've done, to also be successful in negotiation? And the answer to that, in my view, is to understand what the negotiation is about and to insist on getting half the pie. It's clear that you can't have a successful negotiation if both sides want to get more than half. Because if I want 60% and you want 60%, that just doesn't work. And there's no reason for me to take less than half the pie. So I want you to be as ambitious as you can and still get a deal. And the most ambitious you can be is to say, I want to get at least half the pie. Now, if the negotiation were super simple, and I said, you and I have to figure out how to divide up a dollar bill. And if we can't agree on how to divide it up, we both get zero. I don't think the answer here is hard, right? What would you do?
I'd probably go for 50-50.
So try for a moment going for more than 50.
I'll go 75 because I did more work.
And part of the answer, what we're seeing here, is that there aren't any good reasons for why you should get more than half. You can try and make stuff up, but at the end of the day, all you're really doing is just wasting time. And essentially, in the end, we're going to get back to 50-50. In the meantime, I'll think you took away a couple of minutes of my life that I can never get back. I won't necessarily trust you. I won't want to work with you the same way. So if life is simple, in that all we're doing is negotiating over how to divide up $100, we know how to do it. We're going to split it 50-50. And my job is to help people see what the dollar bill is in the negotiation. And once they can recognize that, then they know what to do, which is to divide it up equally.
So let's share straight away your idea of the pie as this additional value that's created through an agreement to work together. And as you say in the book, when the stakes are correctly understood, it is far easier to reach an agreement in the first place.
Absolutely. So people are confused what the negotiation is about. And as a result, they make arguments about fairness that really don't make any sense. But if you can convert the negotiation into a data exercise and use that to measure what the pie is, then actually things become a whole lot more clear. So I'll give you an example based on a negotiation my mother was involved in. She was a renter in Sarasota, Florida, and this was during the pandemic, and her landlord thought that would be a good time to sell the house that she was renting because a lot of people were moving to Florida during the pandemic. And he said to her, Marcia, because that's her name, I'm putting the house up for the market for sale, and you've been a good tenant. I'm happy to sell it to you at a little discount. I think the market price is $800,000, but for you, I'll sell it at $790,000. My mom liked the house. She was happy to buy it at the market price. And so what is the pie in this negotiation? Let me be my professor type and ask you questions.
Oh man, you put me on the spot. So the pie is what he saves from going to the market and all the costs.
Perfect. I love it. You're doing great.
And what she saves from having to go to the market, how to move out, the cost of renting.
Okay, so you are just acing this here.
I read the book, man. I read the book.
But this example is not in the book. So, because I think this happened after the book was written.
Yeah, well, the pie framework helps me understand that, where I wouldn't have before.
Right, the pie framework is in the book, but not this example. So this is great. So what are his costs associated with going to the market? He'd probably have to spend $10,000 putting in new carpets and new appliances, and he'd probably have to spend 5% on a real estate agent commission. So you're talking about 5% of 800,000, that's 40,000, plus 10. And my mom would have to go and move, which hiring a moving truck is sort of a pain. There's costs associated with that. Let's call that 10,000. So I would say the pie is $60,000. And of that 60, my mom is kind of automatically getting 10 because she doesn't pay the moving costs. And he's getting 10 because he doesn't have to do the fix-up costs. And so she comes back and said, look, if we work together, we can save an extra $40,000 beyond what we'd save individually in terms of the real estate agent. And I'm prepared to split that with you half and half. So I'm happy to pay the market price for this house minus $20,000. And he comes back and says, Marcia, I don't think you understand. It's a hot market. And that's why I should get 3/4 of the 40. That's why I'm giving you 10 and I keep 30. Okay. Should I try one more time to see how you'd respond to that?
Yeah, so the pie, if the pie is, you said 60K.
Right, but it's really the 40 that in some sense they have to argue over.
Yeah, the extra.
10 and 10 were already being allocated to them equally in terms
of... Gotcha.
I don't need to reallocate that amount.
So the 40K extra should go 2020 because that's what they create together.
Yes, but he's saying, I want to get 30 and you can have 10 because it's a hot market. So I should get more than half the pie.
Which is the power play you talk about. He believes he's in the power position.
Yeah, so how do you respond to that?
Well, you'd say, well, you have to be willing, as you mentioned the great Herb Cohen, who was a guest on the show. You have to not be emotionally involved and be willing to walk away.
Well, Herb would say you have to care, really care, but not that much. So I think not only do you have to show people what the pie framework is, but you also have to show them why their arguments are wrong. And the answer here is, look, the fact that it's a hot market is why the market price is $800,000, not $700,000. But that has nothing to do with how we're going to split up this 40. That if you sell the house to anyone else besides my mom, you're only going to collect $760. And if my mom wants to buy this house, buy a similar house from anybody else, she's going to have to pay $800. So the only way that the two of you are going to be able to get this extra 40 is if my mom is the buyer and you're the seller.
As you say, there's no extra work there is
No,
incredibly you haven't even valued that.
there's no extra work. That's the part of the 10,000 he's saving in terms of no fixing up the carpets, no leaving the house empty for a month or two while he's trying to find another buyer. Um, so that's already baked in, and he gets it. And so we agree that my mom will buy the house for 2.5% less than the market price. That we'll split the 5% commission. And it turns out there were 5 different houses on that same street that had sold in the last 6 months because it's a development. And so we did some adjustments for square footage, lot size, and so on. And I think we came up with a number like 786,000 and some change, and then split the agent fee. And he really got it because he said, why are we hiring two lawyers to do this contract? Why don't we just hire one lawyer, save the extra lawyer fee, and split the savings? And we did that too.
Amazing, man. And I'm sure you were behind it. It wasn't your mom just read the book.
Uh, yeah, I think there's some truth to that, my friend.
So before we come to the brilliant examples, there's such practical examples in this book. If you're a landlord, if you're renting a house, what do you do if you break the lease? If you're an entrepreneur and you want to sell your business, if you want to buy a business, all these kind of things. If you want to invest, M&A, if you're a judge, if you're a lawyer, so many great things in here. But I thought we'd share the origin here because one of the things I thought about is sometimes you have maybe a narcissist and you're dealing with a narcissist and there'll be a Pyrrhic victory where it's like, oh, and I don't care who wins as long as you don't.
Yeah.
So you have some people, but you mentioned the origin of the pie, which dates right back to the 2,000-year-old Babylonian Talmud.
Yeah. So it's this notion of the principle of the divided cloth. I wonder if I can even come up with a cloth. I think I can. Let's see. Yep, I found something that here will work as a cloth. So basically the idea is that one party, here's our cloth. Maybe it's a little bit too long to put on the screen, so we'll make it half size. One party is asking for some amount, let's say from here to here. And the other party starts at the other end. A little hard for me to do with just by myself. And they go from here to there. And the notion is that the first party has conceded from this amount to the end to me, and I've conceded from this amount to the end to the other side. And what's really in dispute is the part that we're both claiming. And the Talmud says that's what you should divide. And that notion of figuring out what's in dispute is really the insight behind what's in the pie. And I said right in the beginning of this cast, what's confusing to people is they don't know what they're negotiating over. And so in the case of my mom and a house, they think, oh, we're negotiating over the price of the house. Well, there's kind of a market price for that. And there's not a whole lot of dispute. I mean, maybe there's a $5,000 range in terms of what the price per square foot could be and how you do the right comparable and so on. But the real source of this negotiation is how we're going to save that $60,000. That's much bigger than anything else. And that's the real source of what these two parties, this is why these two parties should do the deal and why it makes sense for them to do the deal compared to anybody else. And once you see that, then it just changes everything in terms of how you negotiate.
It's such a brilliant framework. And when you get it, you get it. It took me a while, I have to admit, with the numbers because the examples you're given and the variables you give and the tables in the book, but it's really, really highly worth reading. It's a brilliant skill to have and a new lens through which to see agreement, but also opportunity. I think that's the thing. You see opportunity. One of the ways you saw opportunity, which was brilliantly done, was with bottling. And you brought your inefficiencies to the table. Yeah. Maybe we'll share this one.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that I started a company called Honest Tea. I did that with one of my former students, Seth Goldman. And after doing this for 10 years, Coca-Cola came to us and talked about how we could work together. And one of the opportunities we had to work together was we were paying 19 cents a bottle for the glass bottle that we were using. And Coke could buy those exact same bottles at 11 cents. And there were about 100 million bottles we were buying. So 8 cents on 100 million is $8 million. And the question is, how would you divide up that 8 million between Coke and Honest Tea? Well, if you took the standard approach of proportional division, Coke sales were 40 billion, Honest Tea sales 20 billion. So that's 2,000 to 1 ratio, which means Coke would get 7,996,000 and Honest would get 4,000. Which, you're shaking your head. It's like that's ridiculous. And even they saw that was ridiculous. And it shows you that proportional can't really be right because nobody would accept that. And so they said 7 million for them and 1 million for me, for us. And I come back and say 4 and 4. I say, well, Barry, that's cute, but we're bringing all of our buying power to the table. What are you bringing to the table? And my sarcastic answer is our inefficiencies, in the sense that your buying power isn't worth anything without the fact that we're spending too much on these bottles. Coke has already applied their buying power to their 40 billion in sales. So if they want to apply it to our 100 million bottles, what they need is the group of consumers who think this organic, not too sweet elixir in an overpriced bottle is a great thing. They need our customers, they need our product, and they need the fact that we're overpaying for bottles in order to create this pie. And they say, oh, Barry, that's a pretty good argument. I can see that, but I think you're missing something, which is, look, for Honest Tea, $1 million is a lot of money, life-changing amount of money. Whereas for Coke, it's not even a rounding error on a rounding error. It's not material. So we should get 7 and you get 1. My response is, well, you just told me you don't care about money. Why don't we get 7, you get 1? And once you're in pie land, any argument that somebody makes can be turned around. And therefore, there is no justification for anything but 4 and 4. So also let me give your listeners the epilogue here, because the story didn't end there, which is, in the end, they decided it made sense for them to buy the company. And that is any entrepreneur's dream, to sell to Coca-Cola. Coke is really good at bringing companies from 100 million to $1 billion, and they're also pretty good at bringing companies from 50 million to 0. And so they wanted to wait a few years before they bought us because we were too small. So we agreed that they would buy us in 3 years. And during those 3 years before they bought us, they'd help us with production, with purchasing, distribution. But there was a problem. And the problem is they didn't want to be penalized and have to pay more for all the things they were doing to help us. Okay? So how do you respond when they say that? Seems like a pretty good argument, right? I'm going to help you
exactly.
and then have to pay more?
Well, I know the logic of this, so I don't want to spoil it for audience. I want you to think about it.
We're going to give them away, so let's see how you do on this.
Yeah, so well, I know what you did, where you go, okay, well,
But what's the argument, you say? Not what I did, just what's the argument against that when they say they don't want to be penalized for having to pay more for all the things they're doing to help?
Without me being there, there's no pie to create between us.
That's true. So what you're doing, and you're absolutely right, is what I call the high-level argument. Is if we don't reach an agreement, there is no pie. But you also want to show them what's wrong with their argument, not just what the right argument is. And so the answer is that you shouldn't have to pay full price for all the things you're doing to help us. But you should pay half price. Because, yes, we need you to help us, but you need us as the vehicle to be helped. That without us being here, there is nobody for you to help to create this extra value. So only by coming together do we create this extra pie. And so the right solution is that what you should do is pay full price on sales up to the level we could achieve without your help. And to the extent we go above that, then you pay half price. And so in that sense, you are going to be rewarded for all the things you're doing to help us. but you're going to be rewarded at half level because we're going to get half those rewards too. And we agreed on that framework in the first hour. And then the hard part of the negotiation was, well, what is full price? And what is the level that we could achieve without your help? And what I'd say is that's the data exercise. And so I'm trying to convert negotiation into a data exercise. And the other thing is that we can agree up front that what we're going to do is split the pie. Then we gotten over the contentious part. And now we can focus our efforts on how do we make the pie bigger. And you saw that with my mom's case. We agreed that we were going to split any savings. And so now he can say, well, let's make the pie bigger by hiring one lawyer rather than two.
Absolutely brilliant. And I just wanted to bring it a little bit further because the examples you give are so relatable, and you can easily slot yourself in there as one of the characters at play. Hopefully for many of our listeners can slot into the success that you had with selling the business as you did. But I want to just highlight as well that was your first time actually using it in the field.
Absolutely. So I've been teaching this course at Yale and developing the pie framework and thinking it was going to be useful. But actually, who knew? And then this opportunity came, and Coke said that we weren't allowed to hire investment bankers because they didn't want to turn this into an auction. And so I found myself in the uncomfortable position of having to negotiate the sale of this company. And it's going back to Herb Cohen. He says, you're the worst negotiator when you're negotiating for yourself because you care too much. And boy, did I care a lot. This was going to be a life-changing event. But the trick is to apply the principles of the pie and basically think about the logic of negotiation, and that helps bring down the emotional temperature.
Let's give another example because there's so many brilliant ones in the book. So this is something most of our audience will have experienced, is buying a domain name.
Okay.
But sometimes you go to buy your domain name and somebody's already taken it, but it's not active. What happens in those cases?
Well, this is a little variation of that. This was a case where I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. So I decided for one of the companies that I created, Maker Oats, that I wouldn't hire a lawyer to do a trademark. You don't need a lawyer. You can go to uspto.gov and file your own trademark and save $1,000. But what I forgot was the fact that when you file a trademark, the USPTO publishes the trademarks because they have to, because otherwise existing trademark people wouldn't know who to object to. Oh, you're infringing on my trademark. And the day that the trademark was published, there's a troll, a jerk, who I'll call Edward Kahn because that's his name. And he went and bought the domain name associated with the trademark. He bought makeroads.com. And he writes to me saying that he'd sell it back to me for $2,500. So I'm kind of annoyed here, maybe extremely annoyed. Learned my lesson about not hiring a law firm. And I'm not also as dumb as I sound. Having made this mistake, I did some research and discovered that what he had done is called registration in bad faith, that you're not allowed to do what he did. And ICANN, which is the International Something of Names and Numbers, has a dispute resolution process, which when people do this registration in bad faith, will bring the domain name back to me. They will restore it to its rightful owner. The only problem is that process costs $1,300. So it's quick, and I did some research, and it turns out Edward has gone in front of ICANN on many occasions, and he's lost every single time. And it's not surprising he loses because what he's doing is wrong. Moreover, he doesn't even protest when somebody makes his claim. And, why does he not protest?
Because he has nothing to stand on.
He has nothing to stand on, and why spend the effort? Because he knows he's going to lose.
Yeah.
So I'm really confident that I'm going to win this thing. I mean, 100% confident, basically. And so there's no way I'm going to pay him $2,500 when I can get it from ICANN for $1,300. So I write back to him and tell him that. And I offer him $500. And he comes back at $1,100. So now it's time to bring out the pie. And so who's in a stronger negotiating position, myself or Edward?
You're 1,300 down regardless here. Well, not regardless. Regardless of if you can make a deal with Edward.
Yeah. So what is the pie in this negotiation? I mean, I value this trademark at $40,000. Let's see if that helps.
But the pie is 1,300.
You're absolutely right. I can't trick you. So
I read the book, man.
yeah. So that doesn't, people can read it and still, my students don't always get this right. So if I win the case, I'm going to get the trademark. And so if I reach a deal with Edward, I'm going to get the trademark. And if I don't reach a deal with Edward, I'm going to get the trademark. I'm getting the trademark no matter what happens. So the only question is whether we waste $1,300 at ICANN. In order to do that, Edward needs me to say yes, and I need him to say yes. So the pie is this $1,300 we can save by doing a deal. I tell him that, and I say, look, your 1,100 number is really unfair because you'd be up 1,100, I'd only be up 200. I'm only risking $200 by saying no to you here. So forget that. But I'll pay you $650, and if I do that, you're $650 ahead of no deal, and I'm $650 ahead of no deal, and that's as far as I'll go. And he comes back and says, look, I made these giant moves so far. I'll go down to 900, but I've moved a whole lot more than you have. Was that really right? Has he moved more than I have? So he's pretending he's moved from 2,500 all the way down to 900. So he thinks he's moved 1,600. And he says, well, I'm only going from 500 to 650. But in my view of the world, we weren't even negotiating until he gets to 1,300. And so I think he's moved from 1,300 to 9. And I've moved from 0 to 650. So people will say BS like I've moved more than you, and they're trying to get reciprocity in that. But they'll also just make stuff up. And so when he's at 900 and I'm at 650, my job is at that point to hold firm. And I don't even respond to his letter. And a week later, he says yes. So what's going on here? Because look, Edward doesn't care about the pie. He doesn't care about fairness. He's a jerk. So how did I get him to care about the pie? Well, I don't in the end have to convince him to care about the pie. All I have to do is convince him that I care about the pie. And I don't do unfair deals. And therefore, we can either do a fair deal or we can do no deal. So what's the problem with asking for 700, going up from 650 to 700 when he's at 900?
Apart from he wins.
Yeah. Okay.
It's unfair. It's unfair.
It's not me, but there's something else that I think is another real problem with doing that.
I didn't get that one from the book.
No, you may not. Well, here's the thing. I'm giving up my principle.
Okay.
If my principle is that we split the pie, then 700 is arbitrary. And now I'm playing his game rather than my game. And so if you have principles, you have to stick to them.
Important thing is something that came out in the book is that also you have to be willing to walk away given those principles and your ethics.
Absolutely. And so I gave this presentation at West Point, and this is what they live by. It's like, sometimes we risk our lives, sacrifice our lives over principles. And so my principle is I don't do unfair deals. I'm not asking you to do an unfair deal either, by the way. I've offered you something that's fair. And what most people do is they just throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. Well, can I get you at 2,500? Can I get you at 1,100? Can I get you at 900? But they have no particular reason to pick one number over another. And so they can say it's an ultimatum, it's my last move. But why should I believe that? And so I have this view that principles beat arbitrary.
And the other thing you had on your side was time. I think that's an important thing.
I think the bigger thing is that I had a reason for what I was doing that if we saw right at the beginning, it was a $100 bill, we was going to split it 50-50. And once you see that it's $1,300 and each of us is needed, there's no reason to do anything other than 650. So, and any argument he makes can be turned around. And I'm not asking him to do something that's unfair for him. I'm not saying I'll give you 200 because 200 is better than zero.
Let's share the epilogue.
Well, actually, the epilogue is spend $1,250 and buy the damn domain name before you file the trademark. Let's get that right.
I didn't do my groundwork of sharing what I was talking about, which was you sold that business to Quaker Maker Oats.
Correct.
Another success for you.
Yeah, that's why I valued the trademark so much.
Maybe we'll build on this because there's a brilliant example you give again. And this one really helped you understand the idea of working together. And this was a brother and sister, Bharat and Anju, who wisely took your class in Yale and benefited from it. Maybe she didn't quite pay for her fees, but she got a little bit towards them.
Yeah. So this is a case where it's easy for people to be confused about what the pie is, and a little hard to do as a video because there are numbers involved, but let's give it a try.
I can share them if you like.
Let me okay, see. Sure. I think that'll help if people can see a video.
I have, let me see. Can you see that?
It's perfect. There you go. I think somebody was planning on doing this.
Well, I'm always prepared, man. I'm always prepared.
I'd say so. So now we can really do it with people following along at home. So we have Anju and Bharat who have different amounts of money to invest. And Anju has $5,000 to invest, which at 1% will give you $50. And Bharat has $20,000 to invest, which at 2% will give you $400. But if you can combine their funds, banks will pay higher interest rates when you have a larger amount on deposit. And so they can get 3% on $2,500, which is $750. And the question is, how will the two of them divide the $750? If they can figure out how to do it, then they can split the $750. But they can only do it if they can figure out what's a way they can agree on. And the vast majority of people who have not read this book, who just come to this straight in life, would say, well, Bharat is putting in 4 times as much money as Anju, so Bharat should get 4 times as much of the interest. That would be $600 to $150. And note that in that case, both of them are getting 3% interest. 3% on 5,000 is 150. 3% on 20,000 is 600. And people make this argument all the time that proportional is fair. This is what Aristotle would say, that proportionate is what's just, and the just is what is proportional. But as I said right at the beginning of this podcast, look, people are confused about what the negotiation is over. And in my view, it's not over the $750 because Anju and Bharat are coming into this with $450 between them, 50 for Anju and 400 for Bharat. Why are they coming together? To go from 450 to 750. And so in my view, this negotiation, the pie, is over the extra $300 they can create by coming together. And Anju and Bharat are equally needed to make that happen. And so you should split that 300, 150, 150. People understand correctly this notion of equality, and they try and split the 750 equally, 375, 375. But that doesn't work because Bharat would never take 375. He can get 400 on his own. And so, yes, equality is right, but you have to apply it to the right thing, which is the pie, the extra 300. It's why the two parties are coming together. And once you see that, it just changes your whole perspective. And we've run experiments where we don't tell people about the pie, and a majority of them pick the proportional. And then when we tell Anjus about the pie, it changes people's behavior, and the number of people who will go from the 150 solution to the 200 solution just about doubles. By the way, when we tell Bharats about the pie but not Anjus, doesn't have much impact. So basically the Bharats are happy to take more than half the pie in the proportional solution, so long as the Anjus are unaware of it. But once Anjus have the argument and make it, Bharats don't have a good counter.
You do call that out as well in a chapter about the SEMA, the house, the house sale. And that again, it just shows when somebody is doing it and don't share their upside and the unfairness of that if it gets revealed.
Yeah. So one of the issues you have is, what do you do when you can get more than half the pie because you're doing this proportional solution? And then Anjus later on figures out, oh my gosh, the pie was 300 and I wasn't getting anywhere near half. And you knew that, and you were taking advantage of me in that regard. And so this is an interesting question. That is, if you're in the traditionally more powerful position, should you take advantage of that if the other side doesn't know about the pie? And I think one of the challenges is the Anjus of this world don't always have the vocabulary to come back and tell you why they think they're being treated unfairly, but they know it in their bones. And as a result, they're going to be a whole lot less cooperative with you and may not work together to find opportunities to expand the pie. And so you might decide that you're able to get more than half the pie. And, it also depends a little bit on who you're negotiating with. If I'm negotiating with somebody who is really inexperienced, and do I want to take advantage of them? When a cashier gives me too much money in the supermarket, I correct them and give them back the extra change. I'm not trying to do that. On the other hand, if I'm negotiating with an M&A lawyer and they're willing to give me more than half the pie, well, they're supposed to know better. And so I don't feel as much an obligation to correct them in that case.
There's a really important aspect here that I thought we should share. So firstly, your deep research. Originally, when I got in touch with Barry, I was talking about his brilliant research on co-opetition. So this goes back years. You've been building and incrementally building and compounding this knowledge, including game theory. And maybe we should say a word on game theory because obviously it's a foundational part of this.
Yeah, well, everything I do is built on game theory. In particular, this is based on a cooperative game theory, which people don't always talk about as much, but it is something that Lloyd Shapley won the Nobel Prize for, and it was also one of John Nash, another Nobel Prize winner's main contributions. And so really thinking about how value is created and divided up. And this notion that I've been talking about in terms of the pie is remarkably the way economists see the world. And it may actually be the distinguishing feature between economists and everybody else. And so economists are all about marginal analysis. What's the incremental gain that's created? And so helping people think about marginal analysis, what is the gain that's created through this agreement, was really the insight that led me to this. That is, I'm pretty different from most folks who you'll see talk about negotiation because they'll all be about the interpersonal aspects. Really, let's bond over football or drinks, or I want to make sure I'm treating your customs correctly in terms of who I speak to first in the room. And sure, I think those things are all useful, but I also think they're wildly overblown. So when people buy houses, they write letters to the sellers explaining why they would be the perfect person to own this house. And do I really think somebody's going to give me $20,000 less because I've written a nice letter? Maybe they'll give me $200 or something like that. So the reason I think people are all focused on that is because they don't have the logical component to add. And now you're old enough to know about Star Trek. So what I'm trying to do is bring some of Mr. Spock's logical perspectives into negotiation. And if you can combine that with Captain Kirk's emotional intelligence, you've really got it made.
And one of the things there I thought about so much was in innovation, for example, I'm the innovator. I see the world very differently than those people running the company because they're about the logic and the exploitation of the current advantage while I'm exploring future advantage. And I thought about what you said there about economists, that they see the world in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about the book is that it's about a common language, really, that get people onto the same page, talking about the same thing, and then you can make progress.
Absolutely. That's the problem, is that most people come into a negotiation with conflicting views of fairness. And my view is that when you think about fairness, people say, oh, there is no such thing as objective fairness. And I disagree with that. I go to John Rawls and the notion of this veil of ignorance, that if you didn't know which party you were, you say, well, what's the fair outcome in this case? That's how you figure out what's fair. You cannot take your side. And if you go back to Anju and Bharat, you say, well, oh, look, if I was Bharat, I'd like the proportional solution. Okay, I get that. But if you didn't know you were Bharat ahead of time, and you thought these two people can come together and create $300 extra, I think if you didn't know which side, you would go and say, yeah, we split that 150, 150. And so that notion of being a mediator, being an outside person, saying, I don't know my role, that's how you have to think about what fairness is in negotiation. And by the way, it's not just fairness, let's be clear, it's also power, in the sense that myself and Edward Kahn, or Anju and Bharat, or Coke and Honest Tea, both sides are equally needed to make this deal happen.
One of the great studies, and this is also my own biases, I did French in college, so I did Le Mythe de Sisyphe. Oui, Le Mythe de Sisyphe, the myth of Sisyphus, and I'm also I love the old classics as well. And your story of Sisyphus really, to me, was like, what if somebody does something apparently tiny that nudges the deal for you? And should that be treated with fairness?
Okay, so let's do one that's not in the book that will really test your Sisyphean applications here.
Okay.
So I teach a group of educators at Yale, and they brought to me the following problem, that there was a grant that would give teachers, a pair of teachers, a math teacher and a physics teacher, $5,000 if they would overhaul their curriculum working together. But they could only get this grant if they could agree to work together. And the school principal could allocate the $5,000 between the two of them, but decided he really didn't want to do that because basically he wanted the parties to reach agreement on their own, to both be happy with it. And the challenge is that this program really required a whole lot more effort from the physics teacher than the math teacher. So it was going to require about 40 hours of work, and the physics teacher was going to have to do about 36 hours, and the math teacher only 4. So that was a little bit like the Sisyphus, like that last little bit. There was a small amount of work, relatively speaking, the math teacher had to do relative to the physics teacher. And if they could agree on how to split up the 5,000, then they could make this project happen. So what do you think? How should we split it up?
Well, knowing this Sisyphus story, which we probably should share, by the way, to not leave our audience out of it, but
it'll become clear as part of this.
Yeah, without the other person's piece of expertise, no matter how small it is, there is no 5,000.
Right.
There's nothing to work about.
So what are you going to do?
So you have to split the pie.
That's correct.
Because the pie,
I
won't exist.
I agree with that. So, okay. So now what?
So maybe amidst themselves, they might come up with some type of, well, what a per hourly rate or a pro
Great.
rata rate,
I
and
love it.
then
Okay, so
and then together the difference that they would achieve together, that they agree what slice of the what is the,
okay,
so that would be pro rata, and then the extra is the pie that they share 50-50.
that's fabulous. So that's you have gotten it. So let's start with some wrong answers. So taking the 5,000, dividing it 2,500, 2,500 can't be right. And one way of knowing that is, would you care which party you are? Remember our veil of ignorance story. So if you didn't know you were the math or the physics teacher, which would you rather be if we just split it 2,500, 2,500?
The one doing less.
The
Yeah.
math teacher, right? So therefore, this can't be fair. Okay. The other idea is simply straight pro rata. The physics teacher is doing 9 times as much work, so should get 9 times as much. That would be a division 4,500 to 500. And that's the classic proportional solution. That's basically paying each side $125 an hour for their work. And if I asked you which teacher would you rather be there, what's your answer?
The other guy, not the maths guy.
The physics teacher.
The physics guy.
And the reason is because teachers don't get $125 an hour. And so if you're paying me $125 an hour, I'd like to get as much work as possible. And so that can't be fair. So it sounded fair because everyone was getting the same hourly rate, but not really. So let's, because we're on a podcast and numbers are hard, let's pick an easy number like $50 an hour. I think it's fair to say that teachers get paid something like $50 an hour. And so if the whole amount of money to go around was $200, then they shouldn't do the project. There's no pie because it requires 40 hours of work and $200 not enough. But 40 hours of work at $50 an hour is $2,000. And so the math teacher should be compensated 4 hours at 50, which is 200. The physics teacher should be compensated 36 hours at 50, which is 1,800. And that's 2,000. And the extra 3,000, that's the pie. And that's what gets split 1,500, 1,500. And so the pie has to include the cost of baking it. And so it's not 5,000, it's the extra amount of money that the two sides are getting above the cost of effort that's required to bake it. And so now if we think about Sisyphus, bringing that rock up the hill, there's some reward for doing it. You should split that, but you should also take away the effort cost of bringing the rock most of the way up. And so to the extent the reward is more than that cost of effort, then that extra part is what Sisyphus and the helper would get for finishing the job. And so it is not that if the reward is 5,000, it's split 2,500, 2,500. You first reward people for their effort that was needed to create this pie.
Absolutely brilliant, man. It's brilliant.
Well, you're brilliant because you got it, man. You were right there. And this was not in the book, so you were applying it left and right.
Merci, merci.
Oh,
Bien joué.
de rien.
Nalebuff, c'est pas français, non?
Non, ce n'est pas français,
Non.
mais
Tu parles bien.
comme une vache espagnole peut-être.
Okay, back to breaking a lease. So this is a story. This one was actually, this took a bit more bandwidth for me to get this one, to get the numbers on this one, but it was a brilliant one, and I'd love to share this one. We're not going to share all the stories in the book, and by the way, there's tons, and I haven't even got to through part 1 of the book of 5 parts of the book. It's so much in it, and you can see how much I learned in the book as well. So I'd love to share this one.
Yeah, I think just in general, it's a question of what is going to be lost if you don't reach an agreement. And so how long would the landlord end up finding the apartment unrented? And what is it you could do to help the landlord get the apartment rented or re-rented quicker. And so at one level, imagine that my breaking the lease, I'm responsible for an extra 6 months of rent. Okay. So that's kind of bad. And I'm out of the country, so there's nothing I could do. Okay. Imagine, but in some ways, I have the ability to prevent the landlord from leasing it to anybody else because it's still my apartment, even though I'm not there. And I'm paying the rent for it. But if the landlord could re-rent it to somebody else, that's pretty good for me. And I can't just ask the person to do that out of the kindness of their heart because, look, they're already getting the money. And so I say, well, look, if you can re-rent it to somebody else, I'm happy to split that with you because essentially that is creating a pie. And therefore will reduce the cost of my having been need to go elsewhere. Now, sometimes the law is in my favor and says, look, the landlord has some obligation to do this. So maybe that I would only be on the hook for 4 months of rent rather than 6. Okay. So now the pie is those 4 months. And I say, well, if you worked extra hard, then you could avoid those 4 months. So now should we split those extra 4 months? Well, not entirely, because just like the physics teacher or Sisyphus, that person has to do some work. So I should compensate them for the amount of time and effort they have to do to find the other tenant. And then to the extent we're above that, that's the pie, and that's what we should end up splitting. And so sometimes the pie is working together to avoid losses, which is really like a gain, as opposed to just thinking about how we create value out of nothing by coming together.
And just to say, if you're a legal team out there, Barry coaches teams like that, M&A teams as well, and you can see how maybe buying a company that has debt coming together, and again, you start to see these pies that, well, we can only actually win if we bring the debt together.
So this is an example of basically two companies that are coming together, and one has a tax carry forward or losses that it can't use. And so it actually was a recent merger where they had agreed on all the terms. And then afterwards, the company that was being acquired basically said, we have $50 million of tax losses and we should get them because there are losses. And the buying company CEO was ready to say yes to that. But fortunately, the lawyer in that case was somebody I had trained and said, time out, hold on. It's true that we couldn't get those tax advantages without your losses, but you needed our profits to offset those losses. And only by coming together can your losses and our gains create this value. So just like the real estate commission, let's split that 50-50. And they did. I think people don't really understand this notion of equality, and that leads to many of our society's ills. So there's a very famous law professor, Richard Epstein, who teaches at NYU now. And he talked about getting society coming together and going from a small circle to a much larger circle. And so there's this outer ring that's created by people coming and working together. And he talks about the limit on the distribution of that outer ring is that it should be proportional to how people were dividing up the inner circle. And so somebody who got a big slice of the small circle gets a big slice of the outer ring. And somebody who's getting a little slice of the initial circle gets only a small slice of the outer ring. And you could disagree with me or not about proportional versus equality. But what's interesting to me is that he had no discussion at all. There was another alternative. And this idea that we should just be dividing things up proportionately, that's fair, I think is leading to much of our ills in society today. Because the people who are just getting the proportional amounts of this small gains that are created, that they're needed to make happen, they feel they're being treated unfairly. And they're right. They don't have the vocabulary to explain it. And that's leading to so much social turmoil. That's leading to people who are anti-government and burn it all down. I think it's also connected to a lot of what we've seen in terms of movements for equity, inclusion, which is there are people who have been historically discriminated against, whether it be women, minorities, who have not historically gotten an equal share of the pie when they negotiate. And none of what I am doing will help redress these historical inequities. I got that. But if these groups are able to see the pie and able to split the pie equally and recognize their power, I can at least prevent those historical inequities from being perpetuated. And that's a big step. And so helping people realize the power they have in negotiation that they may not have understood, and that they can exercise that power without being a jerk, and that they can bring their whole self to a negotiation, right? Nothing we've talked about today had any bits of posturing, of jerkiness. It's all about talking about principles. And people generally hate negotiation because they don't see how to behave in a negotiation the way they behave everywhere else in their life. And that's what I want to do in terms of helping people negotiate.
Beautiful, man. And it seems that that underlying ethics is at the heart of the businesses you run. You write about this when you write about your businesses as well. And obviously at the heart of your teaching as well. Barry, for people who want to find you, where's the best place for them to reach out?
Well, splitthepiebook.com is one place you can find it. Of course, Amazon has got a good place. And Yale has a simple rule for email: first name, not last name, at yale.edu. So I read all my emails. Whether I respond to all of them is another story, but I certainly read them all.
Brilliant.
So thank you.
Maybe not from a cyber squatter. Not anymore, because you won't do that again. I won't do it a second time. Barry, it's been an absolute pleasure. You can see I learned so much from you in the short time today, but also from reading the book. Highly, highly recommended. The book is Split the Pie. The author is Barry Nalebuff. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, thank you to our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses with a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability. Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find Kyndryl and a host of brilliant thinkers at the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com or the Institute /Institute. See you next week.